The officially licensed Lord of the Rings Middle-earth Premium Silver Foil is available now exclusively from New Zealand Mint, and is a must-have for all Lord of the Rings collectors and those who love a little bit of movie memorabilia like myself. Housed in its own Perspex case, it's super easy to display in your own collection. Constructed with 35 grams of fine silver, this gorgeous piece is guaranteed legal tender under authority of New A. Limited strictly to 2,000 units, make sure to grab yours now.
Okay, Mr. Director, the cast is set. Take over.
All right, let's have it quiet. Places, everybody. Schroeder, set the mood for the first scene.
Charlie Brown, Snoopy and the Peanuts Gang are the vibrantly melancholy creations of cartoonist Charles M Schulz. First published in American newspapers in 1950, the Peanuts comic strip exploded into the worldwide spotlight in the middle 60s with tens of millions of readers, spawning a mass merchandising craze and an expansive multimedia franchise, consisting of over 50 specials, films and television series and numerous stage productions. In its wake, Peanuts has left an enormous impact on popular and social culture, with TV Guide calling the specials the greatest TV cartoons of all time. In 2020, Peanuts turns 70 years old and remains an iconic staple of Americana. To celebrate, I will trace the entire history of Schulz's strip and its translation into the cartoon medium, spotlighting changes made to narrative presentation and visual design over the last 7 decades. Good grief, it's a cartoon evolution, Charlie Brown. Growing up, Charles M Schulz developed a passion for cartooning, with the desire to someday draw his own comic strip. At age 14, he submitted a sketch of his pet dog Spike to the Ripley's Believe It or Not newspaper panel, and found himself published for the first time. Spike was a white and black spotted hunting dog who Schulz described as the brightest dog I ever met, despite his bad habit of eating sharp objects. In 1945, following a stint in the armed services during World War II, he landed a short-lived gig lettering for Topics magazine, before ending up as an instructor at his alma mater, the Art Instruction School in Minneapolis. Though his dreams may have taken a slight detour, his time at the school would leave a lasting impact, as it was here that he'd meet a friend by the name of Charlie Brown. Schulz continued to submit strip ideas to numerous local papers, finding minor success in 1947 at age 24, when the St. Paul Pioneer Press agreed to print his strip Lil Folks on a freelance basis, paying $10 weekly, the equivalent of about $100 in 2020. Lil Folks has been described as an embryonic peanut, as it was written in a fairly sardonic and solemn voice, and focused on the benign daily activities of a group of children wise beyond their years. A sharply dressed bald boy, a musical prodigy with a love for Beethoven, an incredibly fussy girl, numerous boys with the name Charlie Brown, and their pet dog with human traits. While the strip was originally drawn realistically, over its 2.5-year run, Schulz refined its visual style, first stylizing the characters somewhat so they no longer appeared in scale, and then later removing all remaining detail, presenting instead a fairly simplistic strip starring short children with large round heads. Though the strip was met favourably, Schulz continued to strive for greater success and wider publication. He regularly made the rounds of the syndicates, independent agencies that distributed strips to major national newspapers, but was rejected over and over. Knowing from a young age that failure was a necessity of life, a philosophy and understanding he regularly injected into his work, he said, "I was never discouraged. I always knew that I was getting closer and closer. I was getting better." In early 1950, however, when Schulz asked for a pay raise and for Lil Folks to be moved from the women's section to the comics pages, the newspaper cancelled the strip. Again, undiscouraged, he continued to spruik his work to agencies, until later that year the United Features Syndicate showed interest and picked up the strip for syndication. United's first executive decision was to rename the strip, not only to avoid confusion with the highly popular Lil Abner comics, but to evade any legal conflicts with Tack Knight's 1930s strip Little Folks. The syndicate decided to name the strip Peanuts, inspired by the child audience known as the Peanut Gallery on popular TV series Howdy Doody. Schulz hated the name, believing it didn't make sense and that it would confuse readers as there was no character in it named Peanuts. He suggested calling it Charlie Brown and Friends, though United insisted that a regular name like Charlie Brown couldn't be copyrighted, something Schulz realized years later was a lie. Schulz called Peanuts the worst title ever thought of for a comic strip, feeling it was miserable, degrading, and undignified. He detested it for his whole life, and would even tell anyone who asked what he did for a living that he drew that comic strip with Charlie Brown and Snoopy in it. Peanuts debuted in 7 newspapers on October 7, 1950, with a design similar to the late Lil Folks. The first strip was a fairly simplistic one, featuring Charlie Brown alongside Shermie and Patty, 2 characters that formed the series' core cast for the first few years, but faded into relative obscurity as more and more well-developed, personality-driven characters were introduced. Snoopy made his first appearance in the 3rd strip 2 days later. Schulz actually wanted to call him Sniffy, however discovered that the name was already being used by a comic dog, and instead, remembering his late mother once saying, "If we ever have another dog, we should name it Snoopy," he went with that. Violet and Schroeder debuted in 1951, Lucy and Linus in 1952, Pigpen in 1954, and Charlie Brown's sister Sally in 1959. By the time the decade had ended, Peanuts' core cast had slowly but surely formed, though other beloved characters such as Frida, Peppermint Patty, Franklin, and Woodstock didn't make appearances until the mid to late 1960s, and Marcy and Rerun not until the early 70s. Schulz actually named a vast majority of his characters after friends and family, with various characters even inspired by people he knew. And Snoopy, the curious canine, was of course inspired by his childhood dog, Spike. In 1975, Schulz introduced a character named Spike to the strip as one of Snoopy's many siblings. Moreover, however, Schulz found the series a conduit to explore his own personality, saying, "Everything that you know, everything that you've ever done really goes into this creation. All of the things that you see in the strip, if you were to read it every day and study it, you would know me." As such, Schulz noted on multiple occasions that Lucy represented his own sarcastic and fussy side, Linus his spiritual side, and Snoopy a manifestation of his own fantasies. However, if any one character was Charles M Schulz through and through, it was good old Charlie Brown. Schulz said, "I'm just about 100% Charlie Brown," and the character was a true representation of his own nerve-riddled, unconfident, gloomy, and self-described bland self. Schulz considered himself someone who started off badly and failed at everything, hence why Charlie Brown never received a single Valentine, tanked in his plight to attract the little red-haired girl, and constantly struck out in his attempts to hit or catch a baseball, fly a kite, kick a football out of Lucy's hands, or even beat her at a game of checkers. An unaired 1963 documentary focused on Schulz summed it up perfectly. If there is a way to fail at anything, Charlie Brown has discovered it. Schulz even designed Charlie Brown's looks after his own, giving him what Lucy would call a face. Schulz said, "I was a bland, stupid-looking kid. That's why he always has that dumb expression on his face." Because Peanuts was so deeply personal, Schulz was the sole artist to work on the strips, writing, drawing, lettering, and inking every single panel himself, saying, "I've seen too many strips go downhill terribly because the syndicate tried to hang on to them and have other people do them." Continuing, "If you came to me and said, 'I've got a great idea for a strip,' I'd say, 'Don't tell me, I won't use it.' Do you really think somebody else could draw my strip? I don't think so." Initially only running Monday to Saturday, Schulz added a Sunday strip at the beginning of 1952. He once referred to comic strips as a lifelong creation that just grows from day to day. With this canvas, he was able to evolve his stories slowly and steadily. While the strips debuted as simple gag pieces, they grew to be deeper, more meaningful, and more intricately layered, and in no time, they began to break new ground. For one, their generally melancholic, cynical, and sardonic tone had rarely been seen in the medium before. Likewise, their bittersweet and heartfelt narratives. Their introspective, existential, and philosophic nature was also far ahead of its time, further solidifying Peanuts as an important and revolutionary strip. Furthermore, Schulz never held back from daringly infusing his stories with a satirical edge and regular social commentary, exhibiting issues of racial and gender equality, presenting religious thematics, and even touching on heavy issues such as depression, all of which were very uncommon in the media at the time, particularly in comic strips. Schulz, however, never let such depictions prevail over his narrative and never felt a hero for doing so. He simply presented them as the organic fabric of life as he saw it. Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, said in a 1987 interview, "Every now and then I hear that Peanuts isn't as funny as it was or it's gotten old. I think that what's really happened is that it changed the entire face of comic strips and everybody has now caught up to him. Things that we now take for granted. There's not a cartoonist who's done anything since 1960 that doesn't owe Schulz a tremendous debt." As the stories evolved, character designs did too, as Schulz continually refined his art style. Initially appearing quite simplistic with thick black ink lines, Schulz soon began adding more detailing and settled on a thinly inked look. The early Charlie Brown closely resembled the characters from Lil Folks, with his large football-shaped head and short, dumpy body. However, by the mid-1950s, his head was made slightly smaller and more rounded, making him appear larger and more in proportion. Likewise, the other human characters around him modified correspondingly. However, Snoopy was easily the character whose design modified the most. Beginning as a regular dog, he slowly grew more stylized, appearing as more of a cartoon dog with a short body and long snout. He also gained many anthropomorphic traits, such as the ability to stand upright on his hind legs, first introduced in 1957, and the ability to express his inner thoughts through thought balloons, first seen in 1952. Snoopy was often depicted in new personas, through which he could, in Schulz's words, retreat into fantasies to make his life bearable, as he found potential in exploring the miserable life of dogs. Some of the most well-known alter egos include Joe Cool, the world-famous astronaut, the Beagle Scout, the literary ace, the world-famous attorney, and the masked Marvel. His most beloved persona was, however, the World War I flying ace, often seen dogfighting against an invisible enemy, the Red Baron. Snoopy appeared in close to 200 different fantastical personalities over the years, later leading to enormous merchandising potential. By the early to mid-1960s, Schulz's strip had reached peak evolution, both narratively and stylistically, and character designs remained barely modified thereafter. While the mid to late 60s were considered the golden age of Peanuts, the strip wasn't an instant hit, but Schulz was most comfortable this way, knowing that it would eventually pay off, and it was nearly 10 years before it did. Schulz insisted they never really pursued licensing opportunities and instead waited for licensees to come to them. The first time he majorly licensed the characters was to the Ford Motor Company in 1959, an agreement he only approved because he was a Ford driver. This licensing push saw the characters appear in print ads drawn by Schulz himself and in a selection of animated television commercials animated by Bill Melendez, an industry veteran who got his start working on Walt Disney's early classics before animating close to 40 Looney Tunes for Warner Brothers and dozens more cartoons for UPA. The ads marked the very first time Peanuts made the jump from strip to screen, and Melendez animated them in the economic limited style that UPA had made an industry standard. Hallmarked by rigid movement due to numerous animation shortcuts, limited animation actually complemented Schulz's simplistic vision. In 1963, having just produced and directed A Man Named Mays, a documentary about Willie Mays, the world's greatest baseball player, filmmaker Lee Mendelsohn wanted to produce a follow-up focusing on the world's worst baseball player called A Boy Named Charlie Brown. For the documentary, Schulz spoke in length about the creation of the Peanut strips, providing a rare visual insight into his creative process. Most notably though, the documentary featured a number of cartoon bridging segments, animated by Melendez at Schulz's insistence, as he'd been impressed with the Ford commercials and how faithful they had been to his strip. While A Boy Named Charlie Brown wasn't picked up for sponsorship and thus never aired in its original form, the collaboration between the three artists would lead to something even grander a couple of years down the line. By the middle 60s, Peanuts and Schulz had become a juggernaut. The strip had a readership of roughly 60 million across 700 US and Canadian newspapers and 71 internationally. The strips were also regularly reprinted in mass paperback books, and the characters were the focus of Schulz's 1963 best-selling book of inspirational quotes, Happiness is a Warm Puppy, which sold more copies than any other hardcover non-fiction book in the US that year. Further entering the cultural conversation, a 1965 theological text by Robert L. Short, The Gospel According to Peanuts, also entered bestseller charts, selling over 10 million copies. In 1965, the Peanuts gang received the ultimate accolade when they graced the cover of Time magazine, who branded the strip the leader of a refreshing new breed that takes an unprecedented interest in the basics of life. All combined, Peanuts' reach was continually widened and helped launch what Life magazine in 1967 referred to as the Great Peanuts Craze, with all kinds of merchandise beginning to flood the market. Out of this craze also spawned a classic 1967 musical production, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, which saw both a Broadway and West End run and numerous revivals. A second production, Snoopy the Musical, launched in 1975, with runs off-Broadway, on the West End, in Canada, Australia and South Africa. Additionally, NASA chose Snoopy the astronaut as their flight safety mascot in 1968 and featured him on their flight safety medallion, the Silver Snoopy Award. They additionally used Snoopy and Charlie Brown as call signs for the lunar and command modules respectively in the 1969 Apollo 10 mission and had dolls of the characters placed at mission control. Furthermore, for obvious reasons, they used the nickname Snoopy Cap for their early communication headgear. As a supporter of NASA's space program, Schulz allowed use of his characters free of charge and even created artwork specifically for them. With Peanuts' mounting popularity, Schulz tried his luck at phasing out the much-despised Peanuts title, adding the subtitle Good Old Charlie Brown to the Sunday strips in 1966, and rarely ever feature the word Peanuts in the titles of printed books and cartoons. Despite the subtitle sticking for 21 years, this last-ditch effort never took off, and Peanuts remained. Amidst the frenzy, the Coca-Cola company, who had previously sponsored the Schulz docufilm, turned to Peanuts for their 1965 Christmas advertising. A representative contacted Mendelsohn with the idea of creating a Christmas TV special for CBS featuring the Peanuts gang. Without knowing details, Mendelsohn accepted the offer, falsely saying, "Funny you should ask because we've been working on one for months," to which they replied, "Great, we need a pitch on Monday," which was only a few days away. Mendelsohn immediately called Schulz, saying, "I think I just sold a Charlie Brown Christmas." Baffled, Schulz replied, "What in the world is that?" Mendelsohn simply said, "It's something you're gonna write tomorrow." Insisting once again Melendez be the one to handle the animation, the three artists hunkered down in a living room and nutted out a concept in less than a day. The pitch was approved and the team were given 6 months and a low budget of $76,000 to complete it. In true Schulz style, he refused to conform with many of the norms associated with television production. He was vehemently against the idea of a laugh track, refusing to do the special if one was forced upon him, and he was adamant that child actors were used instead of adults imitating children, which was standard practice. He also insisted that the special centre on the true meaning of Christmas instead of its commercialization, asserting that it include a scene where Linus reads from the Bible. This idea was particularly taboo, as in Schulz's words, that had never been done before. No one would ever put biblical passages in an animated show. Lastly, a slowly moving, mature jazz soundtrack was decided upon, with Vince Guaraldi hired to compose it. Overall, as animation historian Mark Evanier noted, it went against the conventional thinking at the time of what a children's Christmas special had to be. The biggest challenge for the special was that the team had to essentially reinvent Peanuts for the television medium. Evanier noted the characters had never really functioned in that environment before. Someone had to make all the decisions about how they interacted, and what the whole through line was that would make the show work for half an hour and keep people's attentions and be faithful to the newspaper strip. Melendez and his guys had to figure out how to draw like Schulz would if he'd been an animator with their kind of experience. The show went over budget by $20,000, but was completed in record time. However, other than Schulz and Coca-Cola, very few were impressed with the final result. Mendelsohn said, "When Bill and I looked at the final cut, we thought we had ruined Charlie Brown. We didn't think it worked, we thought it was too slow." Likewise, CBS executives absolutely hated it. Fred Silverman, a programming executive at the network, said there was some disappointment that it didn't really translate as well as we thought it would, with execs finding it to be too mature, complex, slow, and unconventional. CBS, however, was already committed. They'd spent the money and had locked the special in with the TV guides. Not to mention it was completed with only 10 days before broadcast. Figuring it would be something they'd play once then sweep under the rug forevermore, CBS aired A Charlie Brown Christmas on December 9, 1965. And much to everyone's astonishment, the show was an enormous hit, though given the Peanuts mania of the time, it's unsurprising that it was. The special took a 49% share of audiences on the night, meaning half of America's TV audience tuned in. And as a result, it was the second highest viewed program that week, behind only Bonanza, the most popular program of the time. The special went on to win an Emmy Award for Outstanding Children's Programming and a Peabody Award. In accepting the Emmy, Schulz said, "Charlie Brown is not used to winning, so we thank you." A Charlie Brown Christmas has continued in annual rotation every year since and has become the single most viewed Christmas special and perhaps special of any kind of all time. On the back of the special, CBS immediately ordered 4 more, and the follow-up, Charlie Brown's All-Stars, aired 6 months later in June of 1966. All-Stars was quainter, but continued to push boundaries, with a story focused on gender equality. While the show was a hit, again taking in a 50% audience share and later nominated for an Emmy, CBS didn't consider it a blockbuster, and demanded their next special be one or no more would be ordered. The team once again hunkered down and concocted Halloween special It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, which continued to push the artistic merit of the series. Sticking within the same limited style, albeit with a marginally higher quality, Melendez moved away from the more minimalist design of the previous specials and of Schulz's strip, with a larger budget allowing for more elaborate backgrounds and more filmic shot framing, making for a lavish cinematic blockbuster in the truest sense of the word. With a fall setting, Melendez was even able to employ more vibrant colours. Mendelsohn later said, "I believe It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown is Bill Melendez's animation masterpiece," noting the flying ace sequence to be one of the most memorable animated scenes ever. Great Pumpkin was expectedly a huge hit when it released only 4 months after All-Stars, and more specials were of course ordered. Between 1965 and Schulz's passing in 2000, 37 specials were made for primetime TV. The specials produced during Schulz's lifetime mostly told original stories. Some of the most beloved and most often repeated Peanuts specials include 1967's You're in Love, Charlie Brown, 1968's He's Your Dog, Charlie Brown, 1973's A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, 1974's It's the Easter Beagle, Charlie Brown, and 1975 1975's Be My Valentine, Charlie Brown. The animation style of the specials remained largely consistent, as did their stories and narrative formula. Two, however, 1982's A Charlie Brown Celebration and 1983's It's an Adventure, Charlie Brown, were formatted as vignette collections, presenting numerous short-form gag pieces and sketches based on storylines and gags taken directly from the strips. One bizarre special, 1988's It's the Girl in the Red Truck, Charlie Brown, was a Beauty and the Beast inspired animation live-action hybrid, focused predominantly on Snoopy's brother Spike falling in love with a human girl. And three further specials were additionally presented as musicals: 1984's It's Flash Beagle, Charlie Brown, a parody of 1980s dance films Flashdance and Footloose, 1985's You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and 1988's Snoopy the Musical, animated adaptations of the stage productions. A live telecast of Good Man also aired in 1973, marking the only time Peanuts characters have officially been depicted in live action on the screen. The creative team additionally produced 4 theatrically released feature films: 1969's A Boy Named Charlie Brown, 1972's Snoopy Come Home, 1977's Race for Your Life, Charlie Brown, and 1980's Bon Voyage, Charlie Brown and Don't Come Back. With larger budgets, longer time frames, and a more cinematic aspect ratio, these 4 films were able to tell more elaborate stories, utilize higher quality animation, and appear overall more extravagant. While the character designs were kept simple, animation style was less limited, allowing for freer and smoother movement. Backgrounds, however, were more detailed, and due to the ability to use multi-plane cameras, the films employed more visual depth. The films were successful, though not to the level of the specials, and while the team enjoyed making them, Schulz noted features to be a difficult medium and too stretched out. Mendelsohn later said, "The half hour is a better form for Charlie Brown because of the pacing. We finally decided after 4 we wouldn't do anymore." In addition to the specials and films, the Peanuts gang also appeared in 2 limited TV series. The first, The Charlie Brown and Snoopy Show, debuted in 1983. Each episode ran for 23 minutes and was presented in the vignette format. Most segments were newly animated, though some were either taken from previous specials or were repurposed deleted scenes from them. Due to poor ratings and Schulz's disinterest to continue, the series only lasted 18 episodes across 2 seasons. The second series was 1988's This Is America, Charlie Brown, an 8-part miniseries depicting the history of America using Peanuts characters in key events. The series allowed experimentation with characters and storytelling style, and Mendelsohn was able to fall back on his documentary background. The series was well received, though in particular, the Mayflower Voyages episode has become a classic in its own right, often presented as a companion to the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving special on TV airings and in home media collections. Schulz continued to write the Peanut strip for the rest of his life, only ever taking 1 vacation in 35 years. While Schulz's trademark wit and philosophic nature remained right to the end, his later strips were noticeably cheerier and more whimsical, with his view on the world perhaps sobering over time. Regardless, Peanuts remained incredibly popular until the end. By 2000, it was running in 2,600 newspapers across 75 countries, had a whopping 355 million readers, and the franchise was pulling in $1.2 billion annually from all sources of revenue. In late 1999, no longer able to keep up the demanding schedule due to declining health, Schulz announced his retirement. The final new daily Peanuts strip ran on January 3rd, 2000, though new Sunday strips ran for another 5 weeks. Schulz passed away on Saturday, February 13, 2000, one day before the final ever new Peanuts ran in papers. For those wondering, Charlie Brown never once kicked the football out of Lucy's hands, with Schulz remarking, "The Charlie Browns in this life never really do succeed." Peanuts remained bittersweet right to the last drop of ink. With a total of 17,897 strips, Peanuts is considered the longest story ever told by a single human being. And as his final dying wish, Schulz requested that no one ever take over the strip. His family and the syndicate have stuck to their word, with Peanuts since only ever printed in reruns under the classic Peanuts banner. The final Peanuts special produced during Schulz's lifetime was 2000's It's the Pied Piper, Charlie Brown, and after his death, Mendelsohn and Melendez produced 5 more, all of which drew directly from his strips. As Mendelsohn said, "We had one of the greatest gag writers of all time. That's why we've been able to continue the shows." The most notable difference in these shorts was the implementation of a digital workflow, with the team moving away from the traditional ink and paint process. As such, these specials appeared with much cleaner animation, utilizing bright, vibrant colors and thin ink lines, much like Schulz's later comics. 2006's He's a Bully, Charlie Brown was the final produced by the pair, with Melendez passing away 2 years later. One final special was released in 2011, Happiness is a Warm Blanket, Charlie Brown, currently the only not to be produced by any of the original team, with the narrative mostly taken from original ideas developed by Schulz's son, Craig. Warm Blanket is the only special produced in HD and is perhaps the simplest of them all visually, employing limited animation and presenting it in a 50s-60s art style with very little detail put into characters or backgrounds. In total, 45 Peanut specials were created for television between 1965 and 2011. In 2008, Peanuts Motion Comics debuted on Apple iTunes, a series of 28-minute episodes, each consisting of 2 4-minute shorts, based on strips published by Schulz in 1964. This series was presented in an even more limited flash animation style, and is easily the worst-looking Peanuts production so far. A further series of shorts, simply titled Peanuts by Schulz, debuted in 2014. Produced by France-based Normal Animation, the series first aired on French TV before appearing on Cartoon Network in the US in 2016. The series once more took from Schulz's original strips and is presented as a true motion comic, moving from panel to panel in an art style reminiscent of Schulz's early strips. While a flash-based series, it's beautifully animated and was a true return to form for Peanuts productions. In total, there were 104 7-minute segments. Peanuts returned to the big screen for the first time in 35 years for 2015's The Peanuts Movie, known as Snoopy and Charlie Brown, The Peanuts Movie in the UK and Australia. The film marked the first appearance of the Peanuts characters in computer animation. Developed by Craig Schulz and his son Brian, the film was produced by 20th Century Fox and Blue Sky Animation. Steve Martino was chosen as director, as the Schulz family loved the faithfulness he brought to his 2008 adaptation of Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who. The Schulz family retained complete creative control on the film to keep an authentic link to Charles Schulz's legacy, drawing almost entirely from his original strips. Craig noted, "You can't bring people in from the outside and expect them to understand Peanuts." Martino and his animators studied the strips and specials for more than a year to find a way to translate their hand-drawn warmth into CG animation. The team employed a jolted look to the animation to evoke the limited style of the hand-drawn specials, and likewise kept backgrounds and scenery motionless, not only to mimic the specials, but to represent the static nature of the strips. The film fared well at the box office, making $246 million on a $99 million budget. It received mostly positive reviews from critics, and most fans lauded it for its authenticity. In 2017, production and brand licensing company WildBrain acquired the Peanuts brand, and between 2018 and 2019 released a series of 36 flash-based web shorts. The animation and character design on these leave a lot to be desired for, but background art aesthetics are quite nice, designed to mimic the painted backgrounds of the original specials. Following soon after, in late 2019, WildBrain's second Peanuts series, Snoopy in Space, debuted. With Apple having recently sealed a distribution contract with WildBrain, Peanuts Worldwide, and Lee Mendelsohn Film Productions, the series launched exclusively on Apple TV Plus as part of their Day One program lineup. The series consisted of 12 8-minute shorts and was once more produced in flash animation. However, with a larger budget and platform, it was more good gorgeously designed, with heavy inspiration drawn from the original specials. While Snoopy in Space has been well received, even garnering an Emmy nomination, it is mostly educational in nature, with many fans and critics bemoaning its lack of the deeper, more somber elements of Schulz's Peanuts. Regardless, in 2021, Apple and WildBrain will release follow-up series The Snoopy Show, which will present another collection of modernized Peanut shorts with Snoopy as their focus. Peanuts has left an impact on our culture arguably more than any other comic strip, and with their legacy now in new hands, there's no doubt we'll see the characters utilised in many more forms over the coming years, whether in their traditional or modernised iterations. With the comic strips in persistent rotation and the specials continuing to air annually on TV and now streaming platforms, the greatest thing is that the characters and their legacy will no doubt continue on into the vastly distant future. And at that, it's over to you. I want to know, what is your favourite Peanuts special, TV series, movie or comic strip? Fire away down in the comments below and let me know your thoughts. Hey everyone, if you haven't yet, smash that big old subscribe button up on your screen to keep up to date with all my content, and hit that like button down below. Also, don't forget to check me out on social media, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon for as little as $1 a month for exclusive videos, early access content, and to get your name up on the screen. Thanks again for watching.